Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Zoo. In this video I'll be working on a grizzly bear habitat, but before I do that I want to thank you guys all for the amazing responses that I got on my tiger trail video. I really wasn't expecting that, but I got so many amazing comments, both really positive and very critical, and I would also like to take a bit of time here to stress that I am really happy to get these critical comments and to get people to tell me that what I'm doing sucks, because there's no way to improve without at least being critical of yourself and having other people try and critique your work as well. Of course, keep it constructive, but please smash me down as much as you can, verbally, naturally, because there's no way that I'm gonna get better at this game otherwise, and especially when it comes to zoos, because at least with how much I like to take these games seriously, and the fact that being here with such a following and having people actually watch my work is quite a privilege. I want to make sure that my stuff is at least good and maybe even a bit educational or interesting or whatever it is. I do like to approach these games as a kind of way to nudge into real life interests and things like that. Anyway, on my last video, especially on Twitter, I got some really good comments. Now, sorry I forgot your name, but there was a specifically good tweet who said that I needed less climbable trees near the rockwork of the tiger enclosure, which is totally true. The tigers would realistically probably be able to escape. Although that said, I also got a lot of comments about the in-game functionality using heat maps that you can check whether animals can escape or not, so thank you very much about that. I used that to make sure that the tigers couldn't escape, and thankfully everything was in order. So the tiger exhibit was pretty much good from an in-game standpoint when it comes to that, but yeah, realism-wise, could be a bit better. Also the staff view was kind of obscured, which is true. I'm gonna have to put more effort into making sure that while guests might not be able to see the animals all the time, so that the animals can actually escape from the guest gaze, staff should always be able to find the animals, so that's something that I'm gonna have to keep in mind a bit more. And also a staff lock of some sort, which is an interesting point, and it's not really part of the game. I suppose I could experiment by adding a smaller habitat to the end of a staff lock and then putting a double lock in there, or a double door in there, which for realism purposes would work, but in game it's something that's not really supported, so I'm gonna have to drag the game a little bit to a different direction to make that work. Also, I got the comment about the separation of the habitat, which was lacking, and I have to be honest, this is my bad for not mentioning this during the commentary. I was actually thinking about this. I figured that underneath the bridge would be a space where the two sides of the tiger habitat could be split up in case we get more tigers, or I want to separate any tigers because they are pretty solitary animals. And it's something that's of course really common in an actual zoo as well. So I didn't do it so far because I didn't really need it. But if need be, I think the habitat would easily be able to be enclosed underneath the bridge, which is a really narrow gap, and on both sides of the bridge are really enough elements to form a separate habitat, including shelter, enrichment, and all of that jazz. So yeah, that was just the notes about the tiger trail. And I have to say, in hindsight, I'm really happy with the tiger trail. I think it was a really cool first exhibit to build in the game. And I also have to say, this one isn't going to be quite as good. Now, I'm already really running behind my time-lapse here because I haven't even talked about what I've been doing. But my idea for this originally was that I basically had no idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a glass structure in the game and then try and make that into some kind of habitat. But there are a bunch of problems with this. For one, I wanted to do it to try and test the in-game glass pieces. Now, most of the in-game glass pieces are on a grid, which is nice, but not very flexible, so I didn't want to use those. So I wanted to use the off-grid ones, and most of those have, I'm not sure how many sides, I think 6 sides, or they're triangles. And I tried making geodesic domes out of those, and after a lot of experimentation I couldn't make it work. Apparently somebody has been able to make it work. If you check the Steam Workshop at the moment, you can find the reptile habitat, made by someone whose name is on the tip of my tongue, but yeah, they figured out how to make it work, which is really cool, but I couldn't, so I ended up going for a more simple arch style shape. But still, I realized that this was kind of an issue because the original idea for this dome was to make it sort of like a reverse greenhouse. So a habitat where I could build habitats for animals for which the climate of the scenario is too warm. Because in this scenario, it's really hot. It's like nearly 40 degrees Celsius. That's just how the climate of this scenario works. And I had grizzly bears in my park already who were becoming way too hot all the time. Oh, by the way, the reptile house with the geodesic domes was made by Parsley. So shout out to Parsley, and also they have a YouTube channel which I really recommend checking out. Got some really cool stuff down there. I'll link it in the description. But yeah, coming back to the topic of the bears, I wanted to find a habitat for the bears to be cool enough, and I figured might as well build a giant building to make an indoor exhibit and then keep it cool enough for the bears to stay in. But I was halfway through building this, probably about at this point in the time-lapse, when I realized that this idea was totally bunk, because making a reverse greenhouse is probably the worst thing for the environment that you can ever do, ironically. Because, you know, keeping a structure cool like this is basically impossible, especially given that it's all glass and the sun is shining. So altogether, that was a very terrible idea. I think the general idea of creating a large-scale, cooler exhibit in a certain indoor location in a climate like this scenario is probably not a great idea, and realistically, if you want to cool down your animals in a zoo, I should have gone for a much more subtle and small-scale approach, as zoos would do in real life, using sprinklers or water elements, or the common trick of hiding some kind of cooling system inside rocks, which could also be a heating system, but in general I find rockwork is very often used to hide things like that related to regulating temperature. Definitely don't want to build a giant fridge like I'm doing right now, because that's just going to result in a giant electricity bill as well. So there's that. But I still decided to keep going with it because I was so far into it, and I figured, you know, at the end of the day, this habitat is not going to be as realistic and as thoughtful as the habitat of the tigers. So honestly, a bit disappointed in myself when it comes to that, but at the same time, this is still just a beta. This is still just the time to mess around, experiment in the game, and try to practice with the tools as well. So I figured, if nothing else, this building will just be a really nice in-game practice run to practice building large-scale glass structures, because that's probably going to be useful later on when I do build elephant exhibits and greenhouses and things like that in a more temperate environment. It's a nice practice also for the more common enclosure setup, where you have a moat, some rockwork and fences, with paths on one side and the enclosure on the other side. I know it's not quite as experimental as the tiger trail, but it's definitely a very common setup in a lot of zoos, so it was a good time to kind of practice this sort of enclosure setup as well, trying to hide the cliff of the path and the moat as much as possible, which was something that I was a bit concerned about. I know I tried doing this during Gamescom for my tiger temple enclosure as well, but I really didn't have enough time to make it work in that case, so I decided to take my time here and try to make this transition work a bit better. It's also a nice practice to build a viewing platform, which I hadn't really tried yet, which I'll get into later in this video. And finally, I figured I could build something similar to what Rudi Renkamel did. Shout out to Rudi, who's making lots of Planet Zoo content, and I really recommend checking out his stuff. You've probably already seen it, because it's really making the rounds, but if you haven't yet, check it out. He made a giant winter dome. That was basically what gave me the idea of maybe trying something similar. I watched his first video and I skipped to the end of it at some point, and right to the point where I skipped, he said, "Ooh, I can feel you skipping to the end of my video," and I've never been caught off guard on a YouTube video as much as that, so that was really scary. But that aside, he puts out really cool stuff, so check him out. I'll link him down in the description as well, if I don't forget, because I'm really good at forgetting links in the description. So yeah, that's my whole thought process and how I ended up in this place where I am building an exhibit that doesn't make as much sense, but I still think it's worthwhile to keep it and to put out this video. I made it in the end, so yeah, there you go. Also, the exterior was really fun to build. The whole glass structure, I think, was quite successful, and I would definitely love to bring back structures like this, maybe a bit more interesting and a bit more focused on design instead of just building a giant archway and putting glass in it. But it was really fun to try and mess with the pieces to try and make this building. It's not too different from things that I've tried in Planet Coaster, but it's been a good practice to mess around with the glass pieces, the steel pieces, and even the art shapes that we have in game to try and make something that's almost a little bit Calatrava-ish, the tiny bit. I'm not a Starchitect like Calatrava is, and the zoo is no major city governing board with the financial and political power to afford such Starchitecture. But, you know, it's a similar kind of idea, very glossy, modern structure with these exposed structural elements and just a very sleek overall look. Now, the exhibit itself is basically a new place for my grizzly bears. I didn't really explain this beforehand, but the way that I went about playing the franchise mode is I first spent a lot of time just building a zoo focused on gameplay elements, trying to get used to how to care for the animals, how to best set up habitats and things like that, so that before I went into making scenery habitats, I would already know, what the gameplay elements are like, what I need to keep in mind to try and make that actually work. So what I ended up with was a zoo that worked really well and made a lot of profit, as you can see in the bottom left corner. Although, of course, this is a non-profit zoo. All of the profits do end up back in the zoo, Of course. But no, basically I did that, so I ended up with this really kind of ugly but functional zoo. So I wanted to make sure that at least most of the animals that I have in there already, I can give a better habitat than they have at the moment. So that's also why I figured I might as well start off with the grizzly bears and give them a better place. At this point I was installing some panels on the glass roof on the sun side, just to make sure that it won't be getting too hot in there. It's still a giant glass building in a warm climate, but this should definitely help. Also brings in some shade into the interior area, on the sides of the bears that is. The guests will still be in the more sunny side. But yeah, hopefully that should at least help to some degree, making this a believably cool building. Cool in the sense of temperature, of course. And at this point, I figured might as well put some decoration on this building, because at the moment it's a bit too contemporary and bland. So I decided to put a sort of silhouette of mountains on it, to give it kind of the idea of North American landscape. Of course, it still doesn't really fit into the actual Asian grassland habitat or environment of the franchise mode, but still, I decided it would be a cool way to spruce up the exterior of the building a little bit. And then the rest of the scenery overall is just going to be very simple. I put a giant wall of glass underneath this section. I really wasn't sure for a while what I would do with the ground floor, whether I would put a solid wall or something like that there. But I think it helps a lot to just keep it completely open. And, of course the building is not completely open, it's mostly closed, but to keep the view of the outside mostly open so that the building feels much larger, more open and less claustrophobic than it really is. And that's basically it. I'm not sure to what extent these trees would be able to survive in the climate of this franchise mode, but I'm just going for a bunch of spruces and all kinds of taiga and tundra temperate bushes and trees. And of course, a lot of rockwork. You can't forget about the rockwork. It's a common staple in zoos. It's a great way to hide, again, the barrier on the outside, and later on hide some of the elements like cooling and things like that. I know Geekism has already said that rockwork is easily the most time-consuming thing when generally people are building habitats in this game, which I think is totally true. It's something that you tend to just sink a lot of time into making it look somewhat natural. Although there is a weird balance when it comes to rockwork and making it look natural in a game like this, I think, given the fact that the rocks in the game really do look like real rocks. And realistically, if you're building a zoo, you kind of want the rockwork to look like the cement that it actually is, because it's really, of course, typically designed to look like natural rockwork, but it's really not entirely natural. maybe safe for some large stones and pebbles and things like that that might be scattered about. But especially when it comes to rockwork that shape the walls of the habitats or cliff sides, etc., you kind of have to make it look unnaturally natural, which is a weird balance to hit. So I'm not sure exactly how to go and approach that. But so far, just putting rocks down in, you know, a different kinds of orders, trying to make some formations with similar rock types, but always placing a different rock and a different rotation and a different kind of placements every time, just helps make it look a bit more natural. And the rest, I suppose, goes for the rest of the habitat as well. I'm just putting a lot of rockwork throughout this habitat, again because I can't really do anything about the ground textures, which don't look too fitting for the kind of habitat that I'm going for. So the rockwork is really going to have to sell the idea of a North American landscape here. And also just give some fun things to play with for the animals as well, because one of my favorite things about this game is still the fact that animals will interact with everything that you put inside a habitat. So the fact that everything that you build really feels so solid is a huge draw for me. So something to keep in mind as well. Make the rockwork, at least to some degree, in a shape that animals can climb onto it and use it to do whatever they want. And aside from that, I'm putting a bunch of other natural elements in here. A lot of dead trees, which are cool in real life because bears like climbing on them. But I have to say, maybe I just haven't seen it happen, but as far as I've seen, I haven't seen my bears climb onto the trees, onto the dead trees or logs or other structures like that. So maybe they don't do it in game, although it would be kind of cool to see something like that. But that was the general idea why I wanted to put all kinds of big logs and fallen trees and things like that in the habitat to give the bears something to play with. And then I'm also building a shelter inside the building here, which, if I think about it in hindsight, is a bit strange, I suppose, but I figured it would be the best place to place some bedding in, so it really feels like you're inside an actual shelter, and it helps hide the view from the guests a little bit as well. So that's why I went with that. As you can see from what I'm building inside the actual building, it's just featuring a lot of wood. I'm trying to go for a subtle rustic Northern American theme, but it's not quite as themed as the Tiger Trail is, so no specific cultural references, just a lot of wood, logs and shingles to try and blend in with the natural foliage as much as I can. And also what you might notice is that I put a barrier halfway through this building, and I'm leaving the other side empty, at least so far. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But the idea for this habitat was also to split it in two. In many zoos in real life, you'll find that habitats of animals, you know, they can rotate or separate the animals between different habitats, and that's something that I wanted to do with the bears as well here. I had too large of a social group for the bears in my old enclosure, so I decided to split them up, and I've got some mothers with some cubs and then some men, so I'm gonna split up the males and put them in a different place for now. So that's why I'm leaving one half of the building empty. I'll get to that side of the habitat as well later on. But yeah, it's good for, you know, the bears to keep them playful, to maybe rotate them between different habitats, and for social reasons to separate them sometimes. Although, then again, in real life zoos, you know, animals will make friendships with each other and have all kinds of social bonds. I'm not aware at this point to what extent the simulation in Planet Zoo goes to that level, and especially in this franchise mode, given that time goes so quickly. Animals realistically only live for a few hours at most, and probably not even that, so it's gonna be hard to, even as a player, create that sort of social bond with the animals, but at least for the way that I'm laying out this habitat, it's something that I wanted to keep in mind. And again, this is all under the guise that this building indoors would have been cooled or something like that. I know it's not a very realistic thing, but in this case I'm going to imagine that it's some sort of a reverse greenhouse where there's more of an actual mountain-like North American climate inside of this building compared to the very warm Asian continent climates on the outside. So yeah, here's another building inside a building to give this whole structure a bit more charm, because the entire modern look of the building is not as nice and not as much like an actual natural habitat. So I'm trying to cover that up as much as I can with more rustic architecture and lots of trees and bushes and rockwork, of course. Can't forget about the rockwork. So that's basically what I'm doing at this point. It's also, again, a good practice to try out some of the other foliage, because I do want to make use of the beta as much as I can to get used to all the different themes and scenery pieces in the game, because there will be more in the final game, and hopefully, if I know all of the pieces from the beta by heart and I'm used to them, it's gonna be easier to adjust to all of the new pieces once we get the full game, so hopefully it'll be easier to just altogether start building habitats and creating scenes in the full game as well. So yeah, it's just good practice, which I think in the end is always a good message to keep in mind, even if you're not happy with something. Like, I'm not happy with this habitat because it's not really realistic. At the end of the day, it's still really good practice, and I'm really happy with the exterior shell of the building and some of the path elements, like this fencing and the smaller foliage around it, and altogether it's just good to try and build stuff. Even if you're not happy with it, it only means that the things you build after it are gonna be better, which I know, it's common sense, but I just wanted to put it out there, even if just to, I don't know, make myself a bit happier about this build in general. I mean, I don't hate it, but it's definitely not as good as I would have liked it to be, and next time I do the grizzly bear habitat, I would love to make it more spread out and try and incorporate the guests in a bit more of a more novel way, because this is a very, very traditional, you know, you just stand somewhere as a guest and the bears are somewhere on the other side of some sort of cliff. I think there are much more interesting ways to try and also get animal and guest interaction. So yeah. Also, something that I should keep in mind, that I should at least talk about right now, so you guys know I'm aware of it. I do want to keep in mind holding spaces and kitchens and vets and things like that, which realistically would be attached to actual habitats. You know, you need to find out a system of where the staff gets in and how the animals can get in and out of the habitats and have their own sort of locked off space where the guests can't see them, for all kinds of purposes. So that's something that I do want to keep in mind. Just for now, I'm focusing on the habitats themselves, but realistically, if I wanted to take this habitat to the next level, I could have attached a building on the side of this building and have a holding space for the bears in there. There's enough space for it, and I did put some facilities that in-game I need, like water management and electricity, but I didn't really delve into it so far. But it's something that I would like to go into a bit more in the final game. Just because personally I like focusing on realism like that, because it, you know, even though it's just a game and it's just a fantasy, the fact that if details like that are worked out, it all feels a little bit more like it could be real, which is something that I like to go for in the end. So yeah. Also, as you might have noticed, there's no waterfall in any of these enclosures. Maybe I should have done that. Maybe I'm being a terrible YouTuber. I've noticed that every YouTuber seems to not be able to resist adding a waterfall into every habitat. So, sorry, I messed up on that one. Decided it wasn't too necessary. I have a lot of water around anyway. But yeah, should definitely have some more waterfalls. Although, that's a bit sassy, but I can't really fault anyone for adding them. Because after playing Planet Coaster waterfall-less for so long, it's really cool to see this game have really beautiful waterfalls, so I would love to make use of it as much as possible as well. Anyway, that is just about it for this habitat. I'm getting ready to put some of the last foliage in, and then I'll get one of the male bears and put them into this habitat. Maybe also get the other one later, but I'm just gonna see, you know, how the bears actually respond to being put in a different habitat, because I haven't tried making a completely split off habitat in the game yet. But yeah, this is basically what it looks like in the end. I made some minor changes also when I wasn't recording anymore, like I made the horizontal beam there grey to make it fit in a bit more with the glass, and so the white arch of the top of the building comes out a bit better. But yeah, as you can see, this is what it looks like from the inside. You kind of have that little mini biome, a little mini mountainous forest region inside the actual grassland biome of the franchise, and I think it works out decently. As long as you don't look too much at the ground textures, because it's far more red, orangish than I would have liked it to be realistically, but that's something I can't really do anything about. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.